Official field reports. Unedited camera footage. Pure justice. You are watching Bodycam incident reports.
Drop the weapon, hands up! Turn around now!
It's a hammer. I'm on my own property. You need to slow down.
I don't care! You match the description! Do what I say!
You're making a mistake, officer. Check the address. This is my house.
Turn around or you're going in cuffs, now!
You really want to go that route?
Officer Kyle Reed screamed the command before he had even fully exited his patrol vehicle, his hand already hovering over the grip of his service pistol. He wasn't interested in explanations. He wasn't interested in context. In his mind, he had already solved the crime before his boots hit the pavement. He saw a black man, a tool that looked like a weapon, and a nice house that didn't match the suspect's description. That was all the math Kyle Reed needed to do. But Officer Reed was about to learn a lesson that the United States Army had spent 30 years instilling in the man standing calmly on the lawn. Never underestimate your opponent, and never engage without intelligence. Kyle Reed had been with the Oak Creek Police Department for 4 years. At 29 years old, he was considered a rising star by some and a liability by others. He was aggressive, proactive, and obsessed with what he called broken windows policing. And if you looked closer at his file, however, a darker pattern emerged. 9 citizen complaints in 4 years, 6 for excessive force, 3 for discourtesy and bias. All of them had been dismissed or unsubstantiated by a department that preferred to sweep problems under the rug rather than address them. Reed had learned that he was untouchable. He believed that his badge gave him the ultimate authority to dictate reality. If he said you were a threat, you were a threat. If he said you didn't belong, you were trespassing. It was 10:15 a.m. on a bright, mild Tuesday in October. The leaves were just starting to turn gold in the upscale neighborhood of Chestnut Hill. It was the kind of place where lawns were manicured to the millimeter, where the silence was only broken by the hum of expensive sedans or the chirp of birds. Standing in the driveway of a pristine 2-story colonial was Marcus Thorne. At 58 years old, Marcus cut an imposing figure. He stood 6'2" with the kind of posture that isn't learned in a gym but forged in formation. His hair was shaved close, graying at the temples, and his face carried the weathered stoic calm of a man who had seen things that would break lesser men. Marcus was wearing a faded gray t-shirt with Army printed in simple black block letters across the chest, stained canvas work pants, and heavy boots. In his right hand he held a framing hammer, in his left a box of galvanized nails. He was repairing a section of his white picket fence that had started to lean after a heavy storm the previous week. Marcus loved this house. He had bought it 3 years ago after retiring as a command sergeant major in E9, the highest enlisted rank in the Army. He had served 30 years. Desert Storm Bosnia, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. He had led battalions. He had been responsible for the lives, discipline, and welfare of thousands of soldiers. He had earned the Legion of Merit and 2 Bronze Stars. Now his mission was simpler. Fix the fence, brew a pot of coffee, and enjoy the peace he had earned. He wasn't bothering anyone. He wasn't loud. He was meticulously aligning a slat of wood, checking it with a level he had placed on the grass. He hummed a low tune to himself, enjoying the bite of the autumn air. He had no idea that 3 houses down a pair of eyes was watching him through drawn blinds, interpreting his industry as criminality. Marcus was exactly where he belonged on property he owned, paid for with a lifetime of service. But to Officer Reed, who was currently speeding toward the scene with lights flashing, and to the neighbor watching from the window, Marcus Thorne was nothing more than a suspect waiting to be apprehended. Derek Vance had moved into Chestnut Hill 6 months ago, and he took his role as a homeowner very seriously. At 34 years old, Derek was a house flipper and day trader who spent most of his time monitoring the stock market and the neighborhood Facebook group. He was the type of man who conflated property values with moral character. He had overextended himself to buy into this zip code, and he was terrified of anything that might threaten his investment. In Derek's world, appearances were everything. If something didn't look right, if it didn't look premium, it was a threat. He had never met Marcus Thorne. Marcus kept to himself, waving politely when he got the mail, but mostly staying private. Derek had assumed the house on the corner belonged to an older white couple he'd seen walking a dog nearby, or perhaps it was an investment property. When he looked out his window that Tuesday morning and saw a large black man in dirty clothes taking a hammer to the fence, Derek didn't see a neighbor doing repairs. He saw urban blight. He saw a scrapper stealing copper or wood. He saw an unlicensed laborer destroying property. Unbelievable, Derek muttered, pacing his living room. Right in broad daylight. He peered through the blinds again. Marcus was prying a loose board free, the wood groaning slightly. To Derek, this was confirmation. He was dismantling the fence. Who dismantles a fence at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday? People with jobs were at work. People who owned houses in Chestnut Hill hired contractors with branded trucks. This man didn't fit the profile. Derek felt a surge of righteous indignation. He was the protector of this street. It was up to him to stop this before it escalated. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket and dialed 911. His heart raced not from fear, but from the thrill of exercising authority. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher asked. Yes, this is Derek Vance. I live on Elm Street. There's a situation at the house on the corner 420 Elm. There's a man there and he's destroying the property. Destroying property, sir, is he a vandal? I think he's breaking in or maybe stripping the place. He's ripping the fence apart. He looks like a transient. He's wearing dirty clothes, looks very aggressive. Is he armed, sir? Derek hesitated. He looked out the window. Marcus was holding the hammer, tapping a nail into place. But in Derek's mind, the narrative needed to be compelling. Police didn't rush for handyman work. They rushed for threats. Yes, Derek said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He has a weapon, a large club or a hammer. He's swinging it around. I'm scared for the neighbors. You need to send someone now. It's a burglary in progress, definitely. Okay, sir. We have units en route. Stay inside and do not approach the suspect. Please hurry, Derek said, hanging up. He felt a sense of satisfaction. He had done his civic duty. He went back to the window to watch the show, confident that he had just saved the neighborhood. He didn't consider the possibility that the man might live there. He didn't consider that he might be wrong. Bias doesn't ask questions. It provides answers that fit its own warped logic. And now, thanks to Derek's call, Officer Kyle Reed was racing toward Elm Street with the understanding that he was responding to an armed burglary in progress involving a violent suspect. Officer Kyle Reed received the dispatch at 10:22 a.m. The computer screen in his cruiser flashed the details: 420 Elm Street. Burglary in progress. Suspect is a black male, large build, wearing military-style clothing. Subject is armed with a blunt weapon. Reporting party states, suspect is aggressive and destroying property. Reed felt the familiar spike of adrenaline. This was what he signed up for. Not writing parking tickets or mediating disputes between neighbors over barking dogs. He wanted the action. He wanted the takedown. He flipped on his lights and siren, pushing the cruiser to 60 miles per hour in a 35 zone. He bypassed the standard procedure of checking the residence's history or ownership records. He didn't wait for backup, even though the call involved a weapon. Reed believed he could handle anything. He was the law, and the law didn't wait. He arrived at Elm Street 4 minutes later, screeching to a halt in front of the 2-story Colonial. He killed the siren but left the lights flashing, the red and blue strobes bouncing off the pristine white siding of the house. He threw the door open and stepped out, his hand immediately going to his holster. The scene in front of him was tranquil, which only made Reed more suspicious. He saw the suspect instantly. A large black man standing near the perimeter fence, back turned to the street, focused on the wood in front of him. The man wasn't running. He wasn't looking around nervously. He was working. But Reed didn't see work. He saw a brazen criminal who was so arrogant he didn't even care that the police had arrived. The dispatcher said, "Aggressive." The dispatcher said, "Weapon." Reed's brain filtered out the level on the grass, the box of nails, the calm demeanor. He saw only the threat. Marcus Thorne heard the car pull up. He heard the door slam. He paused, holding a nail in place, and turned his head slowly. He saw the young officer, barely 30, rushing across his lawn with a hand on his gun. Marcus didn't panic. He didn't flinch. In the chaos of Fallujah, he had learned that panic gets you killed. Assessment keeps you alive. He assessed the officer's poor stance, elevated heart rate visible in his flushed face, tunnel vision. A rookie mistake. "Drop the weapon. Put it on the ground now." Reed shouted again, closing the distance rapidly. He was now 20 feet away, invading Marcus's personal space. Marcus turned fully to face him. He did not drop the hammer immediately because doing so might be interpreted as a throwing motion. Instead, he slowly lowered his arm to his side, keeping his hands visible. His face remained impassive, a mask of command authority that he had worn for decades. "Officer," Marcus said, his voice deep and steady, resonating with a gravelly timbre. "I am going to set this tool on the ground slowly. There is no need for shouting." "I said drop it now." Reed unholstered his weapon, pointing it at the ground, but ready to raise it. "Hands in the air. Do it." Marcus bent his knees slowly, a controlled movement, and placed the hammer on the grass. He stood back up and raised his open hands to chest level. He looked Reed in the eye, not with fear, but with a disappointment that was almost palpable. "The hammer is down," Marcus said. "Now take a breath, son. I live here. I'm fixing my fence." "Shut up," Reed barked, stepping closer, his finger indexing the trigger guard. "Turn around, face away from me. Interlace your fingers behind your head." "I am the homeowner," Marcus repeated, his voice hardening slightly. "You are making a mistake. I suggest you lower your voice and check your dispatch. I'm not going to ask you again." Reed was vibrating with intensity. The calmness of the suspect was unnerving him. Criminals ran. Criminals begged. Criminals fought. They didn't stand there and give orders. This man's confidence felt like a threat to Reed's authority. "Turn around, or I will make you turn around." The air on Elm Street seemed to freeze. Several neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by the sirens and the shouting. Mrs. Gable, a retired schoolteacher in her 60s who lived directly across the street, stood on her porch, hand over her mouth. She knew Marcus. She knew he brought her trash cans in when she was out of town. She took a step forward, confused. "Officer, that's Mr. Thorne," she called out, but her voice was frail and carried away by the wind. Officer Reed didn't hear her. He was locked in a power struggle he had created. He was 3 feet from Marcus now. The size difference was apparent. Marcus outweighed him by 50 pounds of muscle, yet he stood rooted to the spot, compliant but not submissive. "I am not turning around until you tell me why you are on my property with a drawn weapon," Marcus said. He spoke with the diction of a man who had briefed generals. "I have committed no crime. I am repairing a fence on a house that I own. The deed is in my safe. My identification is on the porch table." "I don't care about your ID," Reed yelled. "We have reports of a burglary in progress with a weapon. You match the description. You are detained." "A burglary?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "In broad daylight, while I'm humming a tune, use your eyes, officer. Does this look like a crime scene?" "Stop talking back." Reed holstered his weapon but immediately pulled his taser. The bright yellow plastic pointed squarely at Marcus's chest. "You are resisting a lawful order. Turn around and get on your knees." "I am a retired sergeant major of the United States Army," Marcus said, the steel in his voice becoming sharper. "I served this country for 30 years. I am not getting on my knees in my own front yard for a child who doesn't know how to assess a situation. I will show you my ID. It is right there." He nodded toward the porch 10 feet away. "Do not move toward the house." Reed stepped sideways, cutting off the path. If you move toward the house, I will drop you. Do you understand? You are escalating a non-event, Marcus said. I am unarmed. My hands are visible. You are threatening a citizen on his own land. This is a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights, and frankly, it is a violation of common sense. Last warning, Reed hissed. He was sweating now. He felt the eyes of the neighborhood on him. He felt like he was losing control. In his mind, the only way to regain control was to dominate the physical space. He couldn't let this suspect talk down to him. It was a challenge to his badge. On your knees, now. No, Marcus said simply. Reed snapped. He lunged forward, not with the taser, but with his free hand grabbing Marcus by the shoulder to spin him around. It was a sloppy move born of frustration rather than training. Marcus didn't fight back, but his body was like a statue. He didn't budge. Reed pulled harder, his boots slipping on the grass. Stop resisting! Reed screamed for the benefit of the body camera he knew was recording, though he had forgotten about it until that moment. I am not resisting, Marcus said clearly, looking directly at the lens on Reed's chest. I am standing still. You are assaulting me. That's it. Reed holstered the taser and went for his handcuffs. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and resisting an officer. On what grounds? Marcus asked, his voice remaining level even as Reed grabbed his wrist and twisted it behind his back with unnecessary force. A sharp pain shot through Marcus's rotator cuff, an old injury from an IED blast in 2004. Marcus grimaced but did not cry out. Failure to comply, Reed grunted, forcing the second arm back. The handcuffs clicked shut. They were tight. Too tight. The metal bit into the scar tissue on Marcus's wrist. You are making a career-ending mistake, son. Marcus whispered, his face inches from the vinyl siding of his own home as Reed pushed him forward. You have no idea what you have just done. The scene had now attracted a significant audience. It wasn't just Mrs. Gable anymore. Tom Henderson, a 50-year-old actuary from next door, was standing at the edge of the driveway, his phone held high, recording everything. He looked horrified. Hey! Tom shouted. Officer, that's Marcus. He lives there. What are you doing? Reed spun Marcus around, marching him toward the patrol car. He ignored the neighbor. Back up, stay back, or you'll be arrested for interference, Reed yelled over his shoulder. He's lived here for 3 years, Tom yelled back, not backing down. He's fixing his fence. We all see it. You're arresting him for fixing his fence. Derek Vance. The man who had made the call was watching from his window. He felt a sudden cold knot in his stomach. The police were actually arresting him. Derek had expected them to just move him along, tell him to leave. Arresting him, and the neighbors were defending him. Derek stepped back from the window, letting the blinds snap shut. He suddenly didn't want to be associated with this. Reed shoved Marcus against the side of the cruiser. He patted him down aggressively, his hands searching pockets. He found a pocket knife, a standard-issue multi-tool. Weapon? Reed announced loudly. It's a Leatherman, Marcus corrected. For the screws. Reed pulled a wallet from Marcus's back pocket. He didn't open it. He just tossed it onto the hood of the car. He opened the rear door and pushed Marcus's head down. Get in. Marcus maneuvered his large frame into the cramped back seat. The plastic seat was hard. The handcuffs dug into his spine. He looked out the window at his house, his sanctuary. The fence was still half finished. The level was still on the grass. It was a scene of interrupted domestic peace violated by incompetence. Reed slammed the door and walked around to the driver's side. He glared at Tom Henderson, who was still filming. I said back up. I'm on public property, Tom said, his hand steady. I'm recording this. You didn't even ask for his ID, you just tackled him. He resisted, Reed said, getting into the car. He stood there, Tom shouted. He stood there and told you he lived there. Reed started the engine. He needed to get out of here. The crowd was turning hostile. He told himself he had done the right thing. The suspect was non-compliant. The suspect had a weapon. The neighbors were just confused. He would sort it out at the station. He would charge him with obstruction and maybe a noise violation to make it stick. As the cruiser pulled away, Marcus sat in the back, staring at the back of Reed's head. He began to catalog the violations: failure to verify residence, failure to de-escalate, excessive use of force on a compliant subject, unlawful seizure. He memorized the time. He memorized the route. He memorized Reed's badge number, which he had glimpsed during the pat-down 492. "Officer Reed," Marcus said from the back seat. The silence in the car was heavy. "Quiet back there," Reed said, watching the road. "You didn't check the wallet," Marcus said calmly. "You threw it on the hood, then you put it in your pocket." "You haven't looked at it once. I'll check it at booking." "If you had checked it," Marcus said, "you would have seen my military identification. You would have seen my driver's license with this address. You would have saved yourself a lawsuit." "I said quiet." Reed turned up the radio, drowning out the voice of the man he had just abducted from his own life. The drive to the Oak Creek precinct took 15 minutes. Reed drove fast, eager to process the suspect and validate his actions with paperwork. In his mind, once the charges were filed, he was protected. The system was designed to back the officer, and Reed relied on that shield. They pulled into the sally port, the heavy metal doors clanging shut behind them. Reed hauled Marcus out of the car. Marcus's shoulders ached, but he stood tall. He would not give this man the satisfaction of seeing him slump. He walked with dignity, even in shackles. Reed marched him through the booking doors and into the main processing area. The room smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. Behind the high desk sat Desk Sergeant Thomas Mac McAllister. Mac was 55, a man with a thick white mustache and eyes that had seen everything. He was a former Marine, a veteran of the First Gulf War. He was known for being fair tough and utterly intolerant of nonsense. Mac looked up from his paperwork as Reed entered, shoving Marcus forward. "What do we have, Reed?" Mac asked, his voice weary. "Burglary in progress at 420 El Ma," Reed said, puffing out his chest. "Suspect was destroying a fence with a hammer. Refused to identify. Resisted arrest. Had a knife on him." Mac looked at Marcus. He looked at the suspect. He saw the gray t-shirt with Army on the chest. He saw the canvas pants covered in sawdust. He saw the calm, steely gaze. And then he looked closer. Mac's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward, squinting. "Reed," Mac said slowly. "Bring him to the counter." Reed pushed Marcus to the metal counter. "Name," Reed barked at Marcus. Marcus didn't look at Reed. He looked directly at Sergeant McAllister. "Sergeant Major Marcus Thorne, United States Army, retired, 101st Airborne. Rangers." The room went dead silent. McAllister stood up. He walked around the desk. He didn't look at Reed. He looked at Marcus's wrists bound behind his back. "Marcus Thorne?" Mac asked softly. "From the VFW post, the one who organized the toy drive last Christmas." "The same," Marcus said. "I believe we met at the Veterans Day breakfast. You were with the 1st Marine Division." Mac's face turned a shade of red that signaled a coming explosion. He turned to Reed. The look he gave the younger officer could have peeled paint off the walls. Reed Mac said, his voice dangerously low. "Did you check his ID? He refused to show it." Reed stammered, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. He was non-compliant. He wouldn't get on the ground." "Did you check his ID?" Mac roared, the sound echoing off the concrete block walls. I have his wallet." Reed fumbled in his pocket and pulled out the worn leather wallet. "Give it to me." Mac snatched it from Reed's hand. He flipped it open. He pulled out the driver's license. 420 Elm Street, Class A license. He pulled out the military ID. Command Sergeant Major. Retired. Mac looked up, his eyes blazing. You arrested a homeowner for fixing his own fence. You arrested a sergeant major on his own property. He fit the description, Reed argued, though his voice was shrinking. The caller said he was armed. He had a hammer. He was fixing a fence. Mac slammed the wallet onto the counter. You don't arrest people for carpentry, you idiot. Uncuff him. Now. But Sergeant, he resisted. I said uncuff him before I ripped those cuffs off myself and put them on you. The commotion had drawn attention. The door to the watch commander's office opened and Lieutenant Sarah Jenkins stepped out. She was 48, a 20-year veteran who had been brought in to clean up the department's image. She saw the scene, her desk sergeant purple with rage, a young officer looking terrified, and a black man in handcuffs who looked more composed than anyone else in the room. What is going on here? Jenkins demanded. Officer Reed arrested Sergeant Major Thorne for burglary at his own residence. McAllister spat out, unlocking the handcuffs with trembling hands. As soon as the metal clicked open, Mac stepped back and stood at attention, offering a sharp, respectful nod to Marcus. I apologize, Sergeant Major. Deeply. Marcus rubbed his wrists. There were deep red indentations where the metal had cut in. He rotated his shoulder, wincing slightly. Thank you, Sergeant. Lieutenant Jenkins walked over, picking up the license from the counter. She looked at it, then at Reed. Her expression went cold. Read my office, now. Lieutenant, I followed protocol. Reed tried to defend himself. The 911 call was specific. Active burglary, weapon. Did you verify ownership? Jenkins asked. Did you interview neighbors? Did you de-escalate? He was combative. I was standing still. Marcus interjected. His voice was calm, but it filled the room. I told you where my ID was. I told you I lived there. You chose not to listen because you had already decided who I was. Marcus turned to the lieutenant. Ma'am, this officer ignored every standard of engagement. He escalated a non-threat. He used force on a compliant subject. And he profiled a homeowner based on a biased phone call. I have neighbors who recorded the entire incident. Jenkins looked at Reed. Is that true? Are there recordings? Reed looked down at his boots. There were people with phones. Jenkins closed her eyes for a brief second. She knew what this meant. Officer Reed, surrender your badge and your service weapon. You are placed on administrative leave pending an immediate internal investigation. What you can't... Badge. Gun. Now. Reed's hands shook as he unclipped his holster and unpinned the silver shield from his chest. He placed them on the counter next to Marcus's wallet. He looked stripped smaller. Get him out of here, Jenkins told McAllister. Put him in the break room and call the union rep. He's done for the day. As Reed was led away, looking back with a mix of anger and confusion, Marcus stood rubbing his wrist. Lieutenant Jenkins turned to him. Mr. Thorne, on behalf of the department, I am incredibly sorry. This never should have happened. We will drive you home immediately. We will take your statement there. You don't need to stay here. Marcus looked at her. Lieutenant, I spent 30 years defending the Constitution. I sent boys younger than him into combat. I taught them that authority comes with responsibility. That boy... He gestured to the door where Reed had exited. He thinks the badge is the power. He doesn't understand that the power comes from the trust of the people. You didn't just lose a lawsuit today. You lost the trust of that entire street. I know, Jenkins whispered. I know. The video that Tom Henderson recorded hit the internet 3 hours later. It was titled, Hero Veteran Arrested for Fixing His Own Fence. By evening, it had 2 million views. By the next morning, it was on every national news network. The visuals were undeniable. The calm, older black man standing on his manicured lawn, the screaming, aggressive young officer, the tackle, the handcuffs, the neighbors yelling that he lived there. It was a textbook example of everything wrong with modern policing in certain precincts. The fallout was swift and brutal. The Oak Creek Police Department was inundated with calls. The mayor held a press conference apologizing to Marcus Thorne personally. But apologies do not fix broken trust, and they do not erase the humiliation of being paraded in handcuffs before your neighbors. Marcus sued. He didn't want to, but he knew he had to. He hired a civil rights attorney who specialized in police misconduct. The suit named Officer Reed the police department and the city. It alleged false arrest, excessive force assault, and civil rights violations. During the discovery phase, the 911 call from Derek Vance was released. The public heard the bias in his voice, the fabrication of the weapon, the panic over a man destroying property. Derek Vance was doxxed. He lost his job at the investment firm. He was shunned by the neighborhood. For sale signs went up on his lawn 2 months later. He couldn't handle the glares from Mrs. Gable and Tom Henderson. Officer Kyle Reed was fired. The investigation found that he had violated 7 department policies. He was decertified by the state board, meaning he could never work as a police officer in the state again. His career was over at 29, a casualty of his own arrogance. The city settled with Marcus Thorne for $6 million. It was a record sum for the county. Marcus donated $1 million of it to the local VFW and another $1 million to a legal defense fund for victims of police brutality. 6 months later, Marcus was back in his yard. The fence was finished. It was painted a crisp, bright white. The autumn leaves were gone, replaced by the fresh buds of spring. Marcus stood by the fence sipping a cup of coffee. A patrol car rolled slowly down the street. It wasn't a Charger, it was an SUV. The window rolled down. It was a new officer, older, respectful. He nodded at Marcus. "Morning, Sergeant Major," the officer said. "Morning," Marcus replied, lifting his cup. The car rolled on. Marcus watched it go. He was safe. He was rich. He was vindicated. But as he stood there, looking at the spot on the grass where he had been tackled, he knew the feeling of total safety would never fully return. He had fought for his country on 3 continents, but he had almost lost his life, or at least his freedom in his own front yard. He touched the scar on his wrist, hidden under the cuff of his shirt. It was a reminder. The uniform he had worn for 30 years demanded respect, but the skin he wore every day demanded vigilance. He finished his coffee, went inside, and locked the door. This story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Why is a black man in a nice neighborhood automatically seen as a threat? Why was a decorated veteran's word worth less than a biased neighbor's assumption? And how many Marcus Thornes are there who don't have the rank, the witnesses, or the video to save them? If you believe that home should be a sanctuary for everyone, regardless of skin color, and that false 911 calls should be prosecuted as crimes, let me know in the comments below. And please hit that like button and subscribe. Sharing these stories is the only way to hold the system accountable. We have to keep watching because the cameras are the only shield some people have left.
Case analysis finalized. To stay updated with transparent operations, please hit like and subscribe. Thank you for choosing Bodycam Incident Reports.